let's talk about reform and the Conservatives as well, because Suella Braverman has become the latest high-profile defector. People remember her as the former Home Secretary. I mean, it shows really, I guess, where the momentum is going. You know, whatever you think about Suella, I mean, we've often said that she's probably more suited to punditry than hard politics. I mean, think of some of the quotes like Guardian eating, tofu eating, woke karate is the one that...
Well, isn't that suggest the reverse in that? So, because she's someone who's actually quite, accomplished in terms of academia and the law and what.
Or she'd like to be a pundit.
Yeah, no, exactly. Her forays into sort of punchy tabloid journalism is where she falls flat, I think. But then, it's a really the attempts to sort of downplay this and to be like, oh, this is just, the Reform Party becoming the retirement home for busted flush Tory politicians is just cope, really, to a certain level. Like, it is just the Tory party have been drained of their voters. They're now being drained of various very prominent serving MPs that they previously had, all while they're trying to make a pitch to the electorate as the party of the right. This is disastrous for them. And of course, the defections thing, particularly people who might have been involved in the Reform Party for a very long time, might make some of them uneasy because they think the last Conservative government messed things up so terribly. But it's also historically, defections from one party to another has always been a part of the insurgent party story. You know, when Labour was leapfrogging the Liberals in the early 20th century, it was almost like 50 prominent Liberal politicians made the move over. SDP in the 80s, it was something like 30 predominantly Labour, obviously, politicians moving over to that insurgent party. Which of the two is it going to be? Is it going to be, the SDP failing to break the mould, or is it going to be Labour pulling off that kind of seismic political realignment? That's the question with reform. Is it going to fall short, or is it not? But the attempt to downplay the significance of this, I think, is absurd because it's so clear that it's not only bolstering to reform's prospects, but also more indications that the Tory party are basically in a bit of a death spiral. They're now essentially having an internal conversation about whether or not they should be second fiddle to reform or a less cringy version of the Lib Dems. That's a terrible position to be in. I
disagree with us slightly about the defections, only because I think that there is a question of whether or not Reform are accepting too many former Tories. And the reason for that is because Reform are presenting themselves as the anti-establishment party, and yet they've accepted Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, who have both been serving ministers in government where Britain broke. What really struck me was when Suella did this big speech and with the sort of rally with Reform and announced her defection, she started by saying, Britain is broken. My first thought was, well, you were in government when Britain broke. So, the fact that Reform are accepting these people, I do think raises some eyebrows. And
there's been a bit of quality control in terms of the other ones as well. Like, I don't understand the Nadine Dorries and
I would say that's
the
Jake
Berry stuff. Jake Berry was on TV defending net zero 5 minutes ago.
Exactly.
Really odd.
Nadine Dorries, I think, is the most sort of offensive defection in my view, because she literally is the architect of the Online Safety Act. She loves
Boris Johnson.
Loves Boris Johnson. Loved the lockdowns. Loved all of the big government stuff. That the Conservatives really did harm this country government, and they were part of it. And Reform accepting these people, I do think personally, does make you raise some eyebrows and think, what, how anti-establishment are they?
No, I would say in fairness to Braverman and Jenrick, at least they have, I think, a relatively convincing story of why things didn't go well, whether it's the both of them blaming civil service or Rishi Sunak or whatever. I think they can make a good argument as to why they weren't able to achieve things in the Conservative Party. And, there's a sizable number of wets in the party as well. That is kind of where the centre of gravity is among the MPs. So whereas someone like Nadine Dorries, what is her excuse?
But what's going to change? This is my question. I think you're probably right. They both have compelling stories. But what's going to change? How can Reform convince us that something is going to change that means that when they get into government, they will be able to achieve all of these things? Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, I believe, have both resigned from government due to them saying that,
Jenrick resigned. Suella was sacked.
Oh, she's sacked. Okay. Well, they both left government, and partly they were saying, things aren't working. The civil service are really difficult to deal with.
The tofu munching woke karate is stopping us again.
The tofu munching karate. But what is going to change between now and if Reform go into government? How are they convincing us things are going to change? Or is what's going to happen, which is what I think is going to happen, that nothing will change.
Yeah.
Reform, Farage and Number 10, they're going to say, oh, well, we wanted to do the tax cuts, but, pensioners, we've got to keep spending more and spending more. And that's honestly why I just think we're going down genuinely a path, like a road to serfdom. We're going down perpetual decline here, because I'm not convinced that any of these people really have what it takes to do what needs to be done, because some of what needs to be done will be politically unpopular.
Yeah, and they've got to convince on the policy, which is only really now beginning in earnest. They put a lot more out in relation to the immigration question, but beyond that, people are still pretty in the dark about what's going to happen there. And I think they know that as well. I mean, many of the people behind the scenes have been brought in explicitly to fill that offer.
Okay.
I think that's the area. The personalities, I think, are less important because of the fact that people who are either very switched on to politics or write about it or work in it or whatever, we focus on that endlessly. The thing about someone like even Robert Jenrick, no one knows who he is outside of SW1. So what most people will see is that Reform are on the up, the Conservatives are on the way down. And I quite like what Nigel Farage is saying, if they're reform-minded. So I think it's also a reminder, we talked about this on when we were discussing the Jenrick defection, is that it's just a direction, it's a sign of the direction of travel.
Yeah.
British politics is shifting in a quite kind of tectonic way. The Tories are being lost in that. Labour is being humbled by that, and Reform is on the rise. That's the story.